Does this image look familiar to you? What about this one? You may have recognized it from the Women's March and the women's rights movement. And finally, what about this one? You may have recognized that from the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, what do all these images have in common? Well, aside from looking very similar and being symbols of resisting authority, smashing the patriarchy, and allegedly bringing justice to the oppressed, there's another reason that they look so similar. But before I go into explaining that reason, let's take a moment to look at each of their sites to try to figure out what that reason might be. The Women's March site says this:
through trainings, outreach programs, and events, Women's March is committed to dismantling systems of oppression through nonviolent resistance and building inclusive structures guided by self-determination, dignity, and respect. We must create a society in which women, including Black women, Indigenous women, poor women, immigrant women, disabled women, Jewish women, Muslim women, Latinx women, Asian and Pacific Islander women, lesbian, bi, queer, and trans women are free and able to care for and nurture their families however they are formed in a safe and healthy environment free from structural impediments. And I like how that pretty much says all women except if you're a white woman, conservative woman, Christian woman, or rich woman, basically. You're not included in this healthy and safe environment we're trying to create. Just seems a little hypocritical if you say you're trying to work for all women's rights. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
The Black Lives Matter site says this:
they say, we started out as a chapter-based, member-led organization whose mission was to build local power and to intervene when violence was inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. Now pay attention to the word state here. In the years since, we've been committed to struggling together. If you keep reading, it says Black Lives Matter began as a call to action in response to state-sanctioned violence. Again, the word state. They say our intention from the very beginning was to connect Black people from all over the world who have a shared desire for justice to act together in their communities. The impetus for that commitment was, and still is, the rampant and deliberate violence inflicted on us by the state. Over and over and over, that was just the first two paragraphs. It's by the state, the state, the state. And I'll share why that's important in just a moment. But I just want to add here that their movement is called Black Lives Matter. That's what they claim they're all about. That's what they say on their website. In fact, right here, it says we are guided by the fact that all Black lives matter, regardless of actual or perceived sexual identity, gender expression, economic status, ability, disability, religious beliefs or disbeliefs, immigration status, or location. And to Black Lives Matter, I would ask, well, location or age, for example, like in the womb or if you're a fetus, do those Black Lives Matter? Because if so, you should be addressing the fact that 63% of all abortions are done by African American women. Those are kids, those are babies, children that could go on to be great leaders or, world changers, and yet they're being slaughtered by the masses, basically. And the next thing that they fail to address is that the number one cause of Black deaths are not unarmed Black people against white cops. The number one cause of Black deaths are because of Black on Black violence. Yet nowhere on their website do I see them addressing this issue. The only thing that I see them addressing is the violence done by the state. Over and over and over, they say it. And yet that is a disproportionately small segment of the community, of the Black community that's being affected, whose lives are being taken compared to the Black on Black violence and compared to the number of African American women getting abortions. So if Black lives matter, like they're saying they do, why is the focus only on Black lives who are being affected by the state?
Now, where have I heard this before? Well, remember that first image I showed you? It was called The Hand That Will Rule the World by Ralph Chaplin, and it's a Marxist image. It's meant to depict the rise of the working class, the proletariat, against the oppressive bourgeoisie or the capitalist business owners. Now, not only do the Women's March and the Black Lives Matter movement have the same symbolism, the same imagery as the Marxist movement, they also seem to have the same mission statements. Karl Marx, the author of the Communist Manifesto, said this: "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on uninterrupted, now hidden, now in open fight, that each time ended either in the revolutionary reconstruction of society at large or the common ruin of both contending classes."
Marx also said, "The oppressed are allowed once every few years to decide which particular representatives of the oppressing classes are to represent and repress them."
The entire basis for Marxism is all about getting the oppressed groups to feel so angry and discontented by their oppression that they rise up against the government in an attempt to dismantle the oppressing classes and deconstruct capitalism. That is the whole purpose of Marxism. Marxism plays off of individuals' feelings of oppression or unfairness. Now, after looking at each of the logos of each of these movements, as well as hearing their mission statements, I want to ask you, could it be that the Black Lives Matter movement and the women's rights movements are actually just ploys to implement a Marxist agenda? Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Wow, Bridget, you sound like a total conspiracy theorist who's totally lost it. Obviously, the Black Lives Matter movement is about improving the lives of people of color, and obviously, the Women's March movement and feminism is about benefiting and strengthening the lives of women. You're just looking way too into this. Chill out. To which I say, fair enough. Let's give the Black Lives Matter movement the benefit of the doubt and take a look at what the movement has actually offered as a solution to make Black lives better. The only solutions I've seen so far are, number one, defunding the police, and number two, removing fathers from the home / destroying or obstructing, in their own words, the nuclear family. The Black Lives Matter website recently just posted an article on what it really means to defund the police. They said, "We know that the police don't keep us safe, and as long as we continue to pump money into our corrupt criminal justice system at the expense of housing, health, and education investments, we will never truly be safe." That's why we are calling for #defund the police.
And here is a screenshot, just if you want to pause the video and read it for yourself.
This is what their website has to say about fathers and the nuclear family.
"We build a space that affirms Black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable." Again, notice how it doesn't say fathers.
In my opinion, this sounds pretty vague. You want to get rid of environments created by men and disrupt the nuclear family? What does that mean? And honestly, what it sounds like it means sounds like a terrible idea. Why does it sound like a terrible idea? Because what will these things do? Well, in effect, both of these things will only make Black lives worse. Here's how. Defunding the police does nothing but create more violence because it removes law enforcement from inner cities and lower income communities where police are needed the most. Current utter disregard and disdain towards police also creates what's called the Ferguson effect. This has been going on for years. The Ferguson effect gets its name from Ferguson, Missouri, where a white cop was responding to a call about a burglary. On the way to the site of the crime, he saw two suspects that fit the burglar's description. He pulled over to ask them some questions, and one of the men proceeded to punch the cop in the face and then tried to reach for his gun. That's when the cop, in self-defense, grabbed his gun and shot at the suspect who had just assaulted him and was trying to take his gun. Things escalated as the cop exited his vehicle to try to arrest the man who just assaulted him and would steal his weapon. And the man started running away and then came back and started charging towards the cop. These are what all the investigative reports and eyewitness reports say, that the man was charging at the cop and he shot at him and the man died. Now, the Black Lives Matter movement used this situation claiming to the media that this man had said, "Hands up, don't shoot," when in actuality, he was running towards the cop. In other words, they spread lies to incite rage and violence, and in the following weeks, there was rioting, looting, setting cop cars on fire, similar to the things we see happening now. This is nothing new. Crime increased in Ferguson dramatically because cops were now fearful of the potential repercussions of just doing their job and trying to protect their city. Now, I've talked to a lot of friends in favor of defunding the police, and I've asked them, well, what do you think a good solution is when somebody's robbing your home, or if somebody's threatening to rape you, or gang and drug violence is run rampant because there's nobody to enforce the law? And their response to me was have peaceful mediators to try to de-escalate the situation. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know how effective a peaceful mediator is going to be in convincing a drug cartel not to shoot, or a burglar not to break into your home and steal all your things, or stopping a rapist from trying to rape you. I just don't see a peaceful mediator being an effective alternative to the police when it comes to enforcing the law. Like I said, when in the areas where there is already little to no police funding or coverage, those areas are already suffering the most. Look at the inner city violence. Look at places like Chicago and what happens when police are discouraged from doing their jobs in protecting their city. Now, the second thing the Black Lives Matter movement has offered as a solution to improving Black lives is removing fathers from the home and dismantling or obstructing the nuclear family. Now, there's a huge problem with this because removing fathers from the home does nothing but promote lack of success. Wherever we see fatherless homes, we see an increase in crime, we see an increase in prison rates and suicide rates, in unplanned teenage pregnancies, and in drug abuse. So the very problems that the Black Lives Matter is claiming that they want to eradicate, they're actually propagating with this quote-unquote plan of theirs. Solutions proposed by the Black Lives Matter movement do nothing to benefit Black lives. In fact, their plans only work to make things worse for people of color. Now, why would they do this? Why would they claim that their ideas and their agenda are solutions for people of color when they're really not? Well, maybe taking a look at the Marxist views on police and fathers in the home can help us out here. Now, before I read some Marxist quotes here, remember that the entire basis for Marxism is that his belief is that life is a battle between the proletariat class and the bourgeoisie, or in other words, the working class and their employers, or the ones who employ the businesses, or the 99% and the 1%, or the oppressed and the oppressor. One would think that policemen would fall into the category of the working class, considering many of them only make approximately $40,000 a year while risking their lives on the job to protect communities against crime. But Marx actually saw policemen as an enemy to his vision, a force that supported capitalism and thus needed to be taken down. According to Karl Marx, the state, which is comprised of armed bodies of men and women such as police, prisons, courts, etc., is an organ of class rule, an organ for the oppression of one class by another. It is the creation of order which legalizes and perpetuates this oppression by moderating the conflict between the classes. This quote came from the pamphlet The State and Revolution, Class Society and the State, published almost a century ago by Vladimir Lenin, a predecessor and follower of Marx. On many pro-socialist websites, he is deemed as a leader of the first successful socialist revolution in the former Soviet Union. And I say successful in quotation marks because what these socialists consider successful actually resulted in the mass murder of millions of people. So I don't really consider that a success, but apparently some socialists do. Lenin based much of his writing off the book The Origin of the Family, Private Property and State by Friedrich Engels, who collaborated with Karl Marx in writing the Communist Manifesto. Here's what some other sites have to say about police.
And when you Google Marx's viewpoints on police, this is literally just one of the first of many articles along the same lines that pops up, and this is from leftcom.org. They say, as Marxists, we always try to base our intervention on class analysis. So, in the case of police, we must first try to situate them in the class structure of society. Again, we do not base our conclusions by analyzing any one person at a time. The best way to make this analysis is to evaluate how they relate to capital. Many so-called progressives and labor fakers, as they call them, present the police as ordinary workers doing a dangerous job with no capital at their disposal and hence a part of the working class. This begs the question of, what is the working class? The working class is an immense group of people who must sell their labor as a means of survival. Any attempt to better its situation or even keep up in life comes to direct conflict with the interests of capitalists who exploit them. So this is what they believe about the working class and policemen. They then go on to say that the state is the machine that serves the domination of a class. In this case, they're talking about the bourgeoisie or business owners or anybody who supports capitalism, basically. They go on to say, for most people, the concept of state is associated with legislators and politicians. This is a very partial view of its content. Besides these institutions must be added the bureaucracy, the judicial system, the clergy, the media, the army, and the police. The police are the first line of the armed bodies of men that are intended to defend the interest of the ruling class. If their real function was to stop crime, which in my opinion it is, they would arrest every capitalist on the planet, as these are the true criminals and their regime is the real source of all crime. This is how Marxists view police. Another article that popped up, Marxist.com, it's titled "To End Racism and Police Brutality and Capitalism." And Workers' World posted just another example, racist police violence and the need for a socialist revolution. As you can see, I think I've made it pretty obvious that Karl Marx was very much so against the police because he saw it as just another form of oppression and an extension of capitalism. So now let's take a look at the Marxist perspective or views on family. Now again, this is literally one of the first articles that pops up when you search Marx views on family on Google, and there's tons of other articles along the same lines like it. But Marxists basically argue that the nuclear family performs ideological functions for capitalism. According to Marx, the family acts as a unit of consumption and teaches passive acceptance of hierarchy. It is also the institution through which the wealthy pass down their private property to their children, thus reproducing class inequality. So basically, in Marxist eyes, having a family, being a part of a family, the nuclear family, promoted class inequality because fathers would pass down their property and inheritance to their children. So Marx's desire is really to penalize people for becoming wealthy or for having anything nice. In his eyes, you can't have anything nice because that's unfair to people who don't have anything. That creates inequality. And therefore, what you have should be taken from you and redistributed. It's all about redistributing the wealth. Take from those who have and give to everybody else, which in theory sounds like a great concept. I mean, I am all for giving. I'm all for altruism. I'm all for charity, but I believe that that has to be an individual-based decision and not something mandated by the government, because then you're giving government control over things that they should not have control over. They should not dictate where your finances should go, in my opinion. If you want to give to charities, you should be able to give to charities. If you don't want to give to charities, you shouldn't have to. The next belief that Marxists had in regards to the nuclear family was that it was an ideological apparatus, meaning that it seeks to socialize people to think in a way that justifies inequality and encourages people to accept a capitalist system as fair, natural, and unchangeable. One way Marx claimed this happened is that there is a hierarchy in most families which teaches children to accept that there will always be someone in authority, aka the father, who they must obey, which then mirrors the hierarchy of a boss worker in paid employment later in life. So basically, Marx had a problem with the fact that having fathers in the home, he thought, would serve as an example to children then growing up to respect authority, which in my opinion is not a bad thing. I think people should respect those who are in authority. It's how you don't grow up to be a total piece of crap. You go to work, you respect your boss, and if you do well, then you can move up in the world, then you can move up in society. You don't get ahead in life just by being a total jerk to everyone and by completely disregarding those who are above you. You get ahead by learning from those who are above you, respecting them, and then eventually getting to a place where you can take their place. So as you can see, Marx was very much against the nuclear family and fathers in the home, as he believed these promoted capitalism and what he would probably refer to as indoctrinating children to respect authority. And I just want to add some criticism here for Marx's theory, because I actually know people who are in favor of Marxism. And if you're thinking in your head, yeah, this sounds like a great idea, destroy capitalism, let me just poke a few holes in his theory right now. Number one, the problem I think here that Marx is addressing is consumerism, which yes, many of us overconsume, and that's why a lot of us are in debt and we spend more than we can afford and whatnot. But that's not a direct result of the nuclear family. And what he fails to mention is that there are plenty of families who reject the consumerist lifestyle. The second thing he fails to reject is that there's family diversity in a capitalist society, and that nuclear families are no longer the main type of family. There's lots of single mothers, there's lots of single fathers. You know, divorce has been on the rise in recent years, and I would actually argue, just as this article is arguing, that family breakdown would actually be better for capitalism, as divorce is incredibly expensive and more money has to be spent on maintaining family relationships and later on forming new families. Coming from a divorced home myself, I can testify that this is true. Now, instead of using one or two incomes to support one family, you're now having to support basically two separate families, because now you're trading time between who gets the kids, and then you need to buy things for whatever new home you're living in, and you need to buy things for the kids now to live in that separate home that you're now living in. So divorce is freaking expensive, and I would say divorce probably promotes capitalism more than a nuclear family unit does. And finally, Marx also ignores the benefits of the nuclear family, as I stated before, as it's been shown over and over and over again. When there are two parents in the home supporting a child, they have a much better chance of success than those who do not, specifically when there is a father in the home, because children need that disciplinary hand that mothers often may not provide unless they're a single mother, and then they have to take on the role of being both the disciplinary and the nurturing figure in the family, which then puts more strain on the mother. Again, just the opposite of what Marx was claiming to want to end. And another thing that Marx fails to realize is that most societies in the world, regardless of whether they are capitalist or not, are founded on nuclear families, suggesting that a nuclear family is something that people choose and not something that has come as a result of capitalism, like Marx believed or suggested.
So you're telling me that the Black Lives Matter movement is proposing solutions that actually make Black lives worse, yet simultaneously work to take down capitalism and implement Marxist ideas? Could it be that benefiting and improving Black lives are not the real goals here, and that the real agenda might be something else? The first step towards Marxism is getting people to feel upset about their perceived oppression, and then removing the police. Oh, and let's not forget the tearing down of statues in an attempt to erase history, just like Joseph Stalin did before implementing his communist regime in the Soviet Union. These movements all have the same symbols, they all have the same mission statements, they all have the same methods for implementing Marxism and making it a reality in our society, by getting people angry enough, by believing they're systemically oppressed, that they need to rise up against the government and demand a revolution along with free stuff, and by removing and defunding the police and obstructing the nuclear family. So what's the difference between the feminist movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the Marxist movement? Well, I'm sure you've probably heard the saying, if it looks like a duck, if it talks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. But don't take my word for it. Let's take a look at one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement has to say for herself.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories. And I think that what we really try to do is build a movement that could be utilized by many, many Black folk.
So after looking at these mission statements of these organizations, after hearing their founders speak about how she is a trained Marxist, and after realizing that their quote-unquote plan to improve Black lives does nothing in actuality to improve Black lives, but more so fits in with the agenda of implementing a Marxist society, I'd say it's pretty obvious that this plan of theirs isn't to improve Black lives at all. It's a plan to implement Marxism, and it's literally exploiting people of color and the generations upon generations of pain that their ancestors have had to endure as a vehicle or as the face or mechanism in which they plan to get there. They're using years of oppression that people of color have had to endure to push a political agenda. It's evil and manipulative, and it should be made known. I've brought this up to some of my liberal friends and family members, and I've asked them, isn't it a little concerning to you that the leaders of this movement are Marxists? To which they've replied, Bridget, just because the leaders of this movement are Marxist doesn't mean that they're actually trying to implement a Marxist agenda. To which I've had to reply, really? Because that sounds kind of like you might be saying that just because Hitler was a Nazi doesn't mean he was actually trying to implement a Nazi agenda. I mean, really, people, like, come on. To all my critical thinkers out there, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you believe that the plans the Black Lives Matter movement has proposed to supposedly improve people of color's lives are actually doing anything to benefit and improve the lives of people of color? If so, I'd love to know what you believe they're doing for people of color and how you believe they're going to do it. Because so far, I've seen just the opposite. And I will leave you with one last final thought.
Karl Marx never ran a company, never held political office, never oversaw any accounts, never even held a job, any job. He was supported throughout his life by his friend Friedrich Engels, the son of a wealthy factory owner, and yet he's considered by many to be the greatest social, political, and economic philosopher of all time. All applications of his theory have ended in failure. And when I say failure, I mean failure, like millions of people dying type of failure. So for those of you who think Marxism is actually a good idea, there's just some food for thought. That's all for this video. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.